And speaking of bringing people together, you and I, we're both writers in specific capacities. I was never really journalism forward, but when I got to college, I did pursue my creative writing certificate, and I did a lot of screenwriting due to my film classes. So we talked a little bit about what we could do a little countdown on today, or our draft picks, and we decided on writers, and I went all over the board on this. Like, I've got bloggers on here, I've got book writers, I've got, even got a local writer here. So I know you've got your notes here. So I don't think we're going to overlap too much. But what was your approach going into this draft?
Okay, so I overthought this like you would not believe. So
I just texted you. I dropped a bomb. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to shake it up.
So admittedly, I don't really get much time for reading anymore, for reading for pleasure. Right now, a lot of my books are about classroom management and trauma-informed teaching and things like that. You kind of made me miss my books a little bit with that question. So I came up with authors that I really enjoyed when I did have time to read for pleasure back in college. Okay. These are books I stole from my dad, basically.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you go ahead and launch for me here. Let's hear your first one.
My first one, I'm going to go Stephen King.
Oh my gosh. You are not getting... No, I don't have Stephen King in my life.
Stop it.
What's your favorite Stephen King book?
Oh, man. Eye of the Dragon.
Okay.
It's not a lot of people have heard of this one. It's actually a fantasy novel that he wrote for his daughter.
Interesting.
It's very not Stephen King-ish.
Is there a film adaptation of this one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's incredible.
It was interesting, especially in that time period in the 90s, not to date anything here. But as those books were crossing over into film, that was the hot name in terms of author at that point in time.
Yeah, but every time I would hear about a film adaptation of a Stephen King book, I felt dread because I knew it wouldn't do it any justice.
So my first pick is going to be somebody I've talked a lot about on the show, and a lot of what we're doing here at Max Loves Midland is based on the principles of this particular author. It's Peter Kageyama, and you have 3 books right behind your head at all times, so they're always right back here. For the Love of Cities, Love Where You Live. It's really based on the concepts of that emotional bonds between people in place, and that question of, how do you measure love in a community, and how do you bring it together? So anyone out there who wants to know a little bit more about what this show is based on, go read some Peter Kageyama books.
Awesome. I will definitely check that out.
Yeah. Number 2 for you.
My second pick was Douglas Adams.
Okay.
Because can't talk about authors without bringing up Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is iconic.
Yeah, I mean, everyone should read it. It should be a textbook.
I think it was required when I was in school. I'm not sure if it's still a requirement out there, but I think I had it required in an English class in high school. So
yeah, I don't think it was required for me.
It was a good one. My next one's going to be more of an internet blogger and writer that I think really changed the way sports have been talked about. So I don't know if you'll be familiar with Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons, he's the head of the Ringer Network at this point in time, but I just love Bill's old think pieces on sports, and he just overthinks everything and analyzes it in ways that I find to be extremely entertaining. And just to see the way media has changed and really crossed over from writing into podcasting, and a lot of what we're doing here now is taking your story, which is a written story, and then applying it to this podcast idea. And I think there's a lot of that mixed in through some of that early writing. So I went with Bill Simmons.
That his name does sound familiar. I will say, back when I was a journalism major, I looked up to so many other journalists. I would love to have the confidence of this journalist. But then after I switched careers and went into graphic design, I kind of just let all that knowledge go.
Just let it slide
just
a little
bit. Just let it
go. What do you have for number 3 for me?
Number 3, I have an author named Christopher Moore.
Ooh, okay.
He is very quirky, very interesting, very hilarious. And I honestly don't know how to explain his type of books, but they are just a wild ride, and I would suggest to anyone to check them out.
Awesome. So my next one, I went with Mitch Albom, who worked for... he was a writer in Detroit, so did a lot of columns,
Mitch.
But also wrote books as well. Mm-hmm. And he'll a lot of times be called in as an expert on documentaries about, the Bad Boy Pistons, or he's just kind of a voice in so many different categories. So I just like the flexibility of kind of being able to move and shake in different spaces with competence.
Yeah.
So that's always the goal. So
I'm pretty sure I wrote a letter to Mitch Albom in high school for like a journalism project.
that's super cool.
Yeah.
And he's been known to reach back out. Did you
Yeah.
get?
He wrote back.
He wrote back.
He wrote back.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So
I think that's part of the reason why I chose him is because we all know Mitch writes back.
there we go. That's amazing. Yeah, and that's always been kind of the thing is Mitch will write students specifically. So super awesome. So what do you have for number 4 for me here?
Number 4, I have Tom Robbins.
Okay.
He wrote this book, one of my very, very, very favorite books called Jitterbug Perfume. Another wild ride. He actually kind of his writing reminds me of Christopher Moore a little bit, but just the imagination on this guy, I could not imagine how he came up with this stuff. But the story's great, and maybe there is a movie, a Jitterbug Perfume movie.
That feels familiar to me. I'm not positive though, so
Yeah,
we'll
it's
have to look
just
into it.
Such a cool story.
We'll get our fact checkers to take a look, and
Yeah.
we'll put it in the show notes.
Fact checkers, please.
My next one is going to be an author named Mark Manson. He's more of a current author, and he writes about this idea of the little things in life not getting you down. So his big project, I can't say it here because it's a family show, but it's called like The Secret Art of Not Giving a, and you can fill in that last word if you want.
Oh, maybe I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's like a pretty large book, and then he's got another book that's starts with that particular word, and it's called It, a Book About Hope. And
Oh,
so it's just really
that sounds
funny,
right up
and
my
it's
alley.
kind of like inspirational in a way of, it's a little bit nihilist at times, but it's that idea of you have to kind of move on, and there's virtue in understanding you can get past things, and it's a really, really interesting take on writing.
Oh,
so.
I love that. Yeah, I'll have to check them out.
Absolutely. All right. Here we go. Number 5, final.
All right. So I had to go with Kurt Vonnegut for my number 5.
Okay.
Because his books just really changed the way that I think. Just, again, another great imagination, but just his books really stay with me. And they really just kind of just get my gears moving. And it just helps me look at the world a little bit differently. And I appreciate any book that does that for me.
That's awesome. So this next one is going to be a local storyteller in different avenues, similar to what we're doing here on Max Loves Midland. But somebody I worked alongside to do a 50 Stories for 50 Years series for the Community Foundation a couple years ago, but really someone who kind of laid the blueprint for what we're doing here. And that's Phil Eich. I think Phil has been just an inspiration in our region for storytelling. I met with him actually this morning and just had another coffee with him to talk a little bit about, this vision of always keeping your heart at the core of your work and just that emotional drive to make that difference. And I think what Phil's been able to do with his people portraits and then also taking his business to a nationwide identity of, writing stories in communities and just being a real place and person-based storyteller that connects to the heart of what we're doing. It's somebody I look up to, somebody local, and somebody who's doing a lot of the similar work that we're doing here at Max Loves Midland, and really helped kind of lay the blueprint for a lot of what we're doing here. So I wanted to give some flowers to somebody local. So
Yeah, I actually met Phil very briefly at a Max Loves Midland navigation team meeting.
it was, I think, like first or second quarter last year he came.
Yeah. Not too long ago. What an interesting guy. He has so many cool things to say, and I actually have been following him on Facebook too. And
he's a great storyteller there as well.
Great
Like the social
storyteller.
media writing is phenomenal.
Yeah, and he really understands how important storytelling is in terms of bringing a community together. Just it's through our stories where we find commonalities and where we can find new ways to help each other and support each other and love each other. And, conversely, having curiosity when listening to these stories, it really helps our community bloom. It really does.
Subscribe wherever you consume media. Max Loves Midland is your entertainment, resources, and collective improvement hub for Midland County. Plan your next adventure in Midland at maxlovesmidland.com.